Okay, sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Rukshan. I'm currently working on the National COVID Health Information System, a project done by the Health Information Unit. First, I would like to thank Dr. Buddhika for giving me the opportunity to take part in this project, as well as for the HIU for providing me with the opportunity to conduct today's knowledge sharing session. So I'm going to talk about open source health system development and what we can learn, what we learn by building this system for the past 2 months. So in brief, open source software is a software, a computer software that is released under a license which is copyright holder grants the user the rights to use, study, change, and distribute the software and the source code to anyone for any purpose. This is the definition on Wikipedia. If you look at today's technological landscape, you will see that open source movement is currently powering the development of some of the largest and most used technologies around the world. Two popular examples are Linux operating system, which powers majority of the servers which runs the World Wide Web. Also the Android operating system, which powers more than 80% of mobile devices. Not only that, these systems have created a diverse ecosystem and interoperability among themselves, such as the Linux ecosystem, which can power a server as well as IoT device, such as a Raspberry Pi. At the same time, providing interoperability between each other. So these trends that these big open source systems are using can be used to develop open source health information system. So if you look at today, there are several open source health information systems available. The WHO has a concept called digital goods, which they believe that using open source software is a great way to develop interoperable health systems. And if we can build a system that meets the requirements and standards which WHO has provided, then that system can get the recognition by the WHO as a global digital good. This slide is taken from a presentation prepared by WHO for global goods. So I would like to give the credit for the original creators of this slide. So these digital goods are for WHO to consider a health system to be a digital global good. These are some of the basic criteria where it has to be an open source software and supported by a strong community, funded by multiple sources, deployed at significant scale, which is used around the world, and designed to interoperable across commonly used systems. And also, they believe that it should be easy to implement and scale and can be used across multiple countries, as well as they should have a good governing structure and demonstrated effectiveness. So if these features are met, then the WHO will recognize a health system as a digital global good. So this slide is also taken from the WHO presentation, where these are some of the WHO digital goods, which are open source projects. And you might know some of the systems such as the NCHIS too, and these systems can be used at different levels. For example, NCHIS 2 can be used at a higher level for data aggregation and decision making, while a system such as OpenMRS can be used as electronic medical record. And not only that, like I mentioned earlier, these systems are interoperable between each other. So now coming back to the National COVID Health Information System, it is a health system which is fully open source and developed to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic in Sri Lanka. It is developed with contributors and various stakeholders from the Ministry of Health, the Epidemiology Unit, the regional and as well as provincial directors of health, and so on. And different teams contribute to assess the requirements for documentation, for development, training, and implementation. And all of them are coordinated under the Health Information Director. The project currently has around 20 volunteer developers, mainly consisting of university students as well as professional software developers. And it may be one of the largest open source projects that is currently active in Sri Lanka, and probably the only open source health information system in Sri Lanka which is under active development. So if you look at the current contributors, we have around 12 students from HND and various other government as well as private universities. We have a team for quality assurance as well as a team for documentation, the system, as well as a data entry team, and a team for training and implementation of the software across the country. So this is a screen graph from the project. As you can see, the project has multiple contributors contributing at various levels to helping to develop the system. And this graph shows how we use the open source community to develop the system. If you look at the right side, there's a rapid scaling, and that is when majority of the open source contributors from the universities join together to develop the system. And without their support and without being open source, this kind of a scale would not have been possible. And now so now I'm going to talk about how being open source helped the National COVID Health Information System. So because we have a community of developers and testers, we are able to rapidly develop, test, and release newer versions, and we are able to quickly find and fix bugs. And for example, we can also quickly address new user requirements. For example, if we get a new requirement from the health sectors, we are able to build that user requirement, test it, and release it within 2 to 3 days. And this is all thanks to the great community that we are having. And especially we don't have any vendor lock, so we don't depend on any proprietary software to develop the system. And one of the best examples is how we were able to quickly release a complete redesigned user interface within 2 weeks. So this is the old user interface that the system had. And we were able to quickly change it to a newer user interface with much more features. And talking about more strengths in open source, when developing open source health system, a powerful system can be developed at zero cost. For example, the National COVID Health Information System is a zero cost system. So we did not have, we didn't have to spend any amount of money to develop the current system. If we have outsourced it for a company or institution, it might have cost around millions of rupees to develop the system to its current state. And we were able to do it without spending any amount thanks to the open source nature. And it's because of that, this open source nature might be useful for a country like Sri Lanka with limited resources. And we are able to meet requirements of the country. So this is a highly specified and highly customized system just to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. And not only that, if we get another pandemic in the future, we might be able to, because this is an open source system, we might be able to modify it without much effort to tackle a future pandemic as well. And we have an API which makes it interoperable with other systems as well. And since this is an open source system, we can build an ecosystem around it. For example, like if we want to build a mobile app, we don't have to develop it. Someone from the community who has the talent to develop a mobile app can basically develop a mobile app and implement it and connect with the API and provide that facility. So now about the tools that we use for the development of National COVID Health Information System. One of the important tools is Git. Git allowed us to decentralize the source code and make it sync between all the developers in the community. And it is an essential tool for any open source project. And we currently host the project on GitHub, which is the largest open source community. And because of that, in future as well, we are able to attract interested developers who would like to contribute, because there are a lot of developers actively coming to GitHub every day. And if we are developing a system which is not public, we can still use an on-premise Git server to host a project that is developed in the government sector, which does not require to be public. So we can have all those benefits by using Git. And for example, one thing that I would like to mention is, thanks to Git, we were able to restore a change for while we were developing the two versions, the old version and the new version were developing together, and we accidentally overwrote the new version with the old version. So we completely overwrote the new version that undid the work that we did earlier for the last 2 to 3 weeks. But since we used Git and thanks to its version control system, we were quickly able to restore the work within few days and continue the development without any issue. And because of that, we had to find a Git branching strategy. So I know most of you might be familiar with Git, but you might not know about a Git branching strategy. So it is important to use a proper branching strategy to avoid confusion among the developers and to make contribution simpler. So there are several branching methods such as Git flow and GitHub flow, GitLab flow. So depending on the type of system that you are developing and the way it is developed, whether it is agile development or a continuous integration development, so it is up to you to decide on the Git branching strategy that is most useful for your system. So currently for our project, we decided to go with the Git flow method. It has 2 infinite branches, the development branch and a master branch. So all the features are developed into the development branch. And once the development is complete, and once we finish testing it, we merge it with the master branch and it goes to the production. So it is up to you to decide on the branching strategy. So this is a summary of the Git flow method, where we have a master branch and a development branch, and all features derived from the development branch and merge into the development branch once completed. And then when the development branch is ready, we test it and we merge it with the master branch. Another important tool that we use is a project management tool. A project management tool makes us easier to track the progress of the project, gather user requirements, prioritize work, track issues, and track our milestones. And it's important not only for an open source project, but for any project to have a good project management tool. So this is the tool that we are currently using for our project. As you can see, we can track the issues, the milestones, collect user requirements, make announcements for the development team, and we can see who's doing which task. So everything can be kept on track thanks to the project management tool. So this is how we track issues, and we know which issues have been completed, which are to be done, and who's doing it, and so on. And this is a Kanban board, which is a popular way to track progress of a project. By just looking at this single page, we can get an idea of what are the things that are to be done, what are the things that are in progress, and the things that have completed, and who's doing the task, and what's the deadline, and what's the priority, and so on. So we can prioritize our work, and we know what features or requirements that needed to be developed first. And when it comes to tools we would like to use in future for any open source project, it is important to have a good communication channel. So we might think of, when it comes to communication, we believe that we can use WhatsApp or Viber, but unfortunately, when the projects gets bigger and when we have to coordinate among large number of people, WhatsApp and Viber, these kind of instant messaging platforms have limitations. So there are specific ways where tools we can use to communicate with a large audience. So one of the most used tools are Slack, Discord, and Microsoft Teams. So this is Slack. It's one of the most used tools to communicate in an organization or coordinate a project and so on. So it allows you to create channels, and we can categorize users according to the channel. So we can have a development team, a front-end development team, and we can collect all the front-end developers into a channel named as front-end development. And we can only communicate and send messages only to that channel. So only the people who are working on the front-end will get those messages that they require. So they don't get drowned in message. So the community won't get drowned in messages because these messages are segmented. And this is Discord. And this is a screen grab from the React open source project. As you can see, it has the project has around 165,000 members on the React Discord channel, and 11,000 plus members online when we took the screenshot. So this kind of communication is not possible if we use WhatsApp or Viber kind of a instant messaging service. So currently, even though we are using WhatsApp, we plan on moving to a service like this for make it easier to communicate. So this is important when your project gets larger. And when it comes to challenges that we face, so these challenges may be there for any open source project. So one is there's very lax in responsibility. So we have volunteers, we don't have employees. So we can't enforce or we can't put deadlines on them to do a specific task. And because they are not paid to do it, and they have their own priorities like studies and jobs. So they are contributing it to the project when they are having a free time. So because of that, they don't carry a responsibility of employee. So that's one challenge that we have. And there's difficulty in hiring talented contributors. So unless your project is a popular one, such as NCHIS2, so at an early stage, it will be difficult for you to find contributors or talented contributors for your project. So however, once your project is popular and once it started getting momentum, you will be able to attract these talented developers. So or another option is, if you have funds, you can hire a developer. But since this is a zero budget project, and since Sri Lanka does not have that much of funds to allocate for a project, so we might not be able to hire a certain talented developers to have in a project. And another challenge is we find it difficult to train, because some of the contributors might not have the experience that in development, so or the technology that we are using. So we will have to train them, and training them may be challenging because we have to work on the system as well as train them. And even though we have knowledge about medical ethics, medical administration, patient privacy, and so on, most of the developers do not have this kind of knowledge. So they find it difficult to understand the concepts of what is an RDHS area, what is a PDHS area, and what is an MOH area. So since even though we take these things for granted, and since they don't know these things, so we have to explain it to them, and without knowing them, they can't contribute to a project, so things become challenging. And even though there are lot of contributors for a project, the project may be maintained by a small group of people. So even though we have around 20 developers, there are only 2 people maintaining the project, Dr. Buddhika and myself. So if there are too much contribution, then we get overwhelmed with work, and we find it challenging and to test and merge these changes with the project, and that can be a very stressful experience for the maintainers. And since this is a community and different people have different levels of knowledge about the technologies that we use and so on, so we found it difficult to enforce best practices among the community, because when we conducted a session about Git branching with the students, even though some students were able to understand the concept of the Git flow method and follow it, some students did not understood the concept. So even half of the students were following the best practice, but another half was not. So, and like I mentioned earlier, since they are volunteers, we cannot enforce them. We cannot force them to follow these things. And even there were occasions where, even though some contributors made changes, since they don't have the medical knowledge and how things work, even though their functions worked in one way, they broke down the already existing system. So there were occasions we had to roll back the system and fix these bugs, and sometimes these bugs were found during production. So that became a challenging thing to tackle when we have a lot of contributors. And yes, I talked most of this stuff in the previous slide as well, because some changes broke the already existing system, and we found it difficult to follow the best practices. And this is a screen grab from the project. As you can see, one day when I checked the project, it was like this. So there were a lot of branches. The students have made a lot of contributions, and there was so much, and most of them were not following the best practices that we enforced. If you see the screenshot, you can see branches coming out from everywhere, and there were a lot of branches, a lot of reviewing to be done. So it was a challenging thing for us to follow. But however, when time moved on, and once they started and how to work in the project, they became familiar with it, and these problems settled with time. However, at the beginning, we had a lot of these challenges when it comes to working with the community. As well as code reviewing is another challenge, because when we have this much of contribution and we have to go through each and every code line of code to see if there are any issues and if they have missed something, so it becomes very challenging and very stressful. And I just want to quickly add on how to assess an open source project. So if you start an open source project, there are ways to evaluate the state of your open source project, and that is very important. And these evaluations of open source projects will help organizations to build trust and adopt your software or the health system that you develop. So there are several methods of assessing an open source project, such as open source maturity model, quality of open source, and framework for open source critical system evaluation. These are only 3 main examples, but there are a lot of methodologies for assessing your open source system. So as an evaluation of an open source project can build trust among the organizations, and they will trust your trust and use your project. An evaluation process assesses different aspects of an open source project, from design to testing to documentation, roadmap, licensing, and adopting standards, etc. An evaluation process may give a score or a scale depending on the methodology you use, and you can publish it on your open source project and build trust among the community and organizations to use it. So this is the levels that is used in open source maturity model, which is a popular methodology to assess the open source project that you're developing. As you can see, they assess you on the product documentation, quality, licensing, using IOTs standards, number of commits, and so on, design, and so on. Then they assess on basic, intermediate, and advanced levels. And they ultimately give a score after assessing your project. So when it comes to opportunities, so if you are building a health information system, an open health information system, so these are some of the opportunities that you have. So there's a growing open source community in Sri Lanka. So you can tap into these open source communities to gain support. You can communicate with them, ask for their support, and they will be more than happy to contribute for your open source project. And there's a growing number of BMI community. There's a growing BMI community that that can provide the medical as well as the technical input to a project, because like I mentioned earlier, some of the developers only has the technological knowledge but not the medical knowledge. So the growing BMI community can add the missing technological as well as medical knowledge that is needed for such a system. And actively maintaining projects may attract funding and donations, because when an organization see that your project is well maintained and it is used by a country like Sri Lanka, then they might be interested in providing donations and funding. So you will be able to hire more talented developers for your project. And not only that, helping an open source project is a great opportunity for everyone to develop their skills. For example, working for the NCHIS helped me to learn a lot. So there were some technological areas that I did not have prior experience. So contributing to this open source project helped me to learn those technologies and concepts that I did not know earlier. And it also allowed me to work in a team. So I gained those experiences by working in the project. And importantly, you don't have to be a developer to contribute to an open source project. You can contribute to a project by helping with documentation, translation, data entering, finding and reporting bugs. So you don't necessarily have to be a developer to help an open source project. So as you can see, currently almost all government universities have, which has an IT faculty, has an open source community. So you can easily, and most of them have their own websites. So you can communicate with them, and we may be able to get support for a future health open source project. And when it comes to building a great community around your open source system, so you can use a developer-friendly open source licensing. So there are several methods of licensing. So if you use a method that is attractive, that encourages contribution, so they will be more likely to contribute to a project. And you can follow standard technologies. For example, there are a lot of React developers in Sri Lanka. So you can use technology such as React for your open source project. And then since there are a lot of developers in Sri Lanka, they don't have to learn it from the beginning and they can contribute directly. So that reduces the challenge of training them. And you can also follow the best practices laid out by Google, such as the Google styling guide and other guides. So they will be able to easily contribute for your project. And it's also important to communicate well with contributors and by writing blog posts and polite code reviews and comments. And since we I would quickly like to mention something, one experience that I didn't include in the presentation. So like I mentioned earlier, we had two versions running parallelly. We were developing it together, so the newer version and the older version. So once we completed the newer version, which has a better user interface and more functionality, we thought that the users will accept and they will like the change. We like the change. We like the newer version more than the older version, and the health information unit and the directors also like the newer version over the older version. But once we released it, after working 2 to 3 months, once we released the newer version, the users who are using the system did not like the change, and there were a lot of how can I say, negative feedback for the change, because even though there were a lot of improvements, they have gotten used to the older system, that they kind of like resisted the change. So ultimately what we did was we deployed the two systems parallelly, the old system and the new system. And the old system had a link saying, if you would like to try the newer system, you can go by clicking to this link. So some people who like the newer version were able to go to the newer version by clicking the login link, and people who like the older system were able to use it if they liked it. And then what we did was we stopped the development of the older system. So we did not add any new user requirements to the newer system. We added them to the, we didn't add the newer user requirements to the old system, and we added them only to the new system. So when we got requests saying that how is their user requirements are going, we said to them that it is available on the newer system. So you will be able to log into the newer system, and you'll be able to use your user requirement. And once they started gradually moving to the newer systems, because their user requirements were added to the newer system, we swapped the login pages. So by default, they will log into the newer system, and if they wanted to log into the older system, they can do so by clicking the link. Previously, the default login page was for the older system, and they had to go to the newer system by clicking the link. So we swapped the login pages, and once they gradually started getting used to the newer system, we completely pulled the plug off and decided to straight away use the newer system as the default system. So that is one experience that we gained. So even though we like the change, maybe the people who are using the system might not like the change. So sometimes you will have to make a gradual change. So that may be not related to open source health system, but that is an experience that I would like to share. So that is the presentation. So if anyone has questions, I would be happy to answer, and your suggestions are also welcome.
I'm sure there will be many interesting questions that can be posted towards Dr. Rukshan. Any questions? Or even Dr. Buddhika, you can trigger some discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rukshan, for the excellent presentation. I think he will be ready to answer any questions, and especially I think if we can use open source projects for our software requirements, I think we can have a bigger product, and you can give any suggestions. So you can if you think that where we should improve, we will definitely take that into account. Thank you.
Yeah, just to inform you, extremely sorry about the delay and the technical glitch that we could not initiate the start of the session on due time. But still, we were able to listen to a very valuable presentation and sharing the experience the team had in developing and managing the NCHIS. So we believe that we had a very fruitful input from Dr. Rukshan. So are there any questions? If there are no further questions, we would like to conclude this session, and we would like to congratulate the good work the team is doing on the NCHIS. And thank you, Dr. Rukshan. I think you are the first MSc BMI undergraduate to present in this forum, and congratulations to you on that regard. And thank you so much for sharing your experience. And we believe that the people having your skill set would be a great asset for this BMI or the health informatics community. So, with that words, we would like to conclude this session, and we would like to meet you once again with another knowledge sharing session conducted and organized by the Health Information Unit. So, until such time, stay safe and bye bye. Over and out from Health Information Unit.